Hi, Frogo here. Today I'm going to be talking about frogs. Now, before we start, let's make a little disclaimer. I'm going to give you two examples to illustrate my point. Here is the fire salamander, and here is the American bullfrog. Fire salamander is considered protected in Europe. Actually, most countries protect it because it is a sign of healthy nature, right? It isn't endangered or anything, it's just that the laws in the European countries tend to protect them. On the other hand, if you find a bullfrog in Europe, it will be a threat to nature. So most states try to crack down on poachers and people who try to, mess up with nature. And that means that you will have to be very wary of the legal status you're in when you're manipulating frogs and amphibians. On that though, my video will be about frogs, why my way to keep them is way easier and way cooler than most others, though I'm not against it. Now, what are the others? Well, when you think of keeping frogs, you'll think of keeping them inside, which would be terrariums. Now, here are three examples, this is not an exhaustive list, of frogs that you will commonly find in terrariums. The one on the left is a Chinese frog, it's called Calula pulchra. It's a very frog that likes digging burrows and not doing anything of their days, like all frogs, honestly. The second one, the middle one, is called the Pac-Man frog. It comes from South America, and it likes leaving its head in the open. It's a hunter, and you can feed it, small mices when it's adult. Frozen mices, not live one. And finally, you have the infamous white tree frog on the right. Now, this one is from the meme. They're very popular because the reproduction is easy, handling is easy compared to other amphibians, and also they have a very funny face. What that all boils down to is terrarium and aquarium hobby. Now, to those who aren't very familiar with both, they're quite linked because these are glass enclosures that will keep animals inside. Common point of all of these animals, well, most of these, will be that they're from tropical areas, rather warm and humid. That would be Central and South America, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. Now, these places, I call them warm and humid. This is nothing scientific, right? It's warm, lukewarm, tropical, and whatever. Most frogs are from Southeast Asia when it comes to terrarium. While the place they come from might be very awesome, it looks like this. Now, it looks awesome, but that doesn't look like a normal human household. Humans tend to live in drier areas. And that will mean that you will have to imitate these habitats when you're taking care of frogs. Another point, though, is that these habitats tend to be very specified, if that's the right word, and you will have to be very wary of the specificity that your amphibians have according to their environment. If you Google frog and terrarium on Amazon, for example, you will find such results. Now, if you're not new to the terrarium hobby, you know that these are very simple tools to use, right? I'm not trying to deter anyone from starting here, but I've never had a terrarium before. And here are the metrics you will have to consider having control over. Temperature with a heater. The decoration, that's pretty easy. The substrate that you will have to change because your amphibian, just like any other animals, will poop. The water bathing thing, which is just, like a little water container. The light, you have to control the UV, whether it's, UV LED, whether your amphibian lives in a shady forest or in the high plains or in sunny marshes. And also, very importantly, humidity, which, yes, you will control with a mister, but also you might have to control it with something that can measure it. Now, here are some videos on why frogs are maybe not the easiest animal in the world to keep. The two last videos on the bottom are the very reason why amphibians are considered very threatened now. Let's talk about chytridiomycosis. This is an unavoidable subject when you're talking about amphibians. This is a very deadly fungi, not a disease, a fungi that causes them to have a problem with their skin. Now, to those who don't know, frogs have a permeable skin, which means that they drink and breathe through it. Second video from the top is about poor Coco having intestinal parasites. Now, it's from Jessica Animal's friend. It's one of her 2 tree frogs, I think. She's trying to recover. She's in recovery and under medication. The frog, not Jessica. Well, not that I know of. And I wish her a good recovery. I hope she recovers well. And the first one is from this infamous YouTuber, Wiccan's Wicked Reptiles, whose main focus is reptiles in terrarium mostly, about frogs. In this video he will try to deter people from having frogs because they're quite hard to take care of. The main reasons, if I remember well, is that they tend to be very fragile. You cannot handle them as easy as you could handle, let's say, snakes and lizards, because you need gloves to handle terrarium amphibians. They catch sicknesses and fungi pretty easily, as I said before, and they're too specific, as I said, about their environment. However, there is another way you can go around this. Now, if sometimes you surprisingly go touch out the grass, you might realize that there are animals outside your house, maybe at your very doorstep. Now, I'm really sorry for people living in apartment buildings, but my way to keep frogs is pretty much impossible if you don't have a garden. And that is, of course, garden frogs. Now, this is not a scientific name. I'm sorry, biologists, I'm butchering your field. But I find it easier to group these frogs under this denomination because, well, they're frogs that can live in a garden. Well, that means that they will tolerate your presence, not be domesticated, let's say, but just tolerate your presence. They will be sedentary, meaning that toads, salamander do not count because they will walk around and probably get lost or get crushed by a car or something. And what else? And yeah, I tend to prefer frogs that like more aquatic environments. More on that later. Now here are 3 examples of frogs that could be called garden frogs by Mighty Me. The one on the left is very infamous. I've talked about it before. It's the American bullfrog. That one is a small one that I caught near my house. Near the lake where I go fishing. In Europe, we have a bunch of frogs that can live in the city, really. This is one of mine. He's called Cope, and it's a marsh frog. Now, marsh frogs are very well known for their legs in French cuisine, and are quite of the origins of frog eating in Europe. And in Asia, you have the Chinese edible frog. Now, I've never been to Asia, but I know that these are very common to see because these are the first resources of frog legs. There are many frog farms with Chinese edible frogs. Now, what these 3 have in common is that we humans tend to eat their legs a lot, and we tend to make them reproduce so that we can eat more of them. I've had marsh frogs for around 10 years now, and they've been doing well. And I've had like 3 at the beginning. Now they're around 14. Really, they're kind of wreaking havoc when it comes to noise. But they've been doing very well, even going with my fish. More on that later. Now, here is another person that has frogs in their garden. Now, yes, this one is in an enclosure. But it's an outside enclosure, so I guess that doesn't count as a terrarium, right? Plus, it's more aquatic. The person owning this page is from Thailand. Unfortunately, the main frog, which you can see on the first post, died. but it's still worth checking out this account. So by all accounts, go check love.leafrogs on Instagram. Now, what these frogs have in common is perks. Perks that can make them live next to us. Now, as I told you before, these do mind human presence, though they will tolerate it, right? A lot of amphibians tend to see that there is human activity and then just hide away, get away, just as soon as possible. You can also, it is not unknown that these frogs were farmed and are still farmed now. It's known that Chinese edible frog will tolerate overcrowding to a certain extent. Same goes for the marsh frog. There is a variety that has been developed in France, I think, that's called Rivant 92, but I've not seen them with my own eyes, but apparently you can have similar results than the Chinese bullfrog. Chinese edible frogs. Now, these were actually so interesting to be, their hardiness was so interesting that there was research by scientists made on it. For example, here is a marsh frog that I've found in the middle of my city center. Now, that may not be very, impressive, but Rana rudibunda, or marsh frogs, have been observed in polluted areas, not only living, but even thriving. I've seen them near the plants, near the place where I go fishing. Yeah, I go fishing there. And I've also seen them next to the nuclear plant of my region. I could not take photos of them because they were too small. It's a nuclear plant. So yeah, you can't just go there. And it's actually been so much of a thriving species that in some places of Europe, these frogs might be considered not invasive, but exotic. Now, their singing noise is very unique compared to a lot of frogs. I mean, all of amphibians have a unique noise. Now, if you live in America, so goes for the bullfrog, the mighty bullfrog. This one I caught it next to the place I go fishing to. And it is, well, I don't know if that one is, but it is a carrier of the fungi, chytridiomycosis. Now, worst of all, it is an asymptomatic carrier, so it will be completely healthy, though it has what we call the frog plague. But if you live in America, and not where it's from, right? You might want to consider having them in your garden. And if it's not forbidden, hell, you can do whatever you want. That's not my garden. Now, the proof that these frogs will be healthy is reproduction. Reproduction goes through a lot of stages, right? They will reproduce every year, laying eggs. Marsh frogs tend to lay eggs quite messily, but some other frogs, they tend to lay eggs in clumps. And also, they sing. Now, as I told you before, they're so hardy that they have been around my goldfishes for quite some time now. They've been together for all the time I've had a pond, and, well, actually, the goldfishes were here before, and they've not caused any problem. My goldfishes have even reproduced along the frogs, and my frog population has been going steadily up, just like my fishes. There might be some problems after all, but it is just to show you that these frogs are less deranged by fishes than most amphibian species, which you will be more likely to hear that there will be disturbed by fishes. A lot of people say that frogs and toads avoid ponds with fishes. Now, I could not afford a pond without fishes because I do not like mosquitoes. And here you go, some mosquito fish with my tadpoles. Strangely enough, they have not been preying down on them, or at least I've not seen them do so. I've seen them hang around my very young my very young tadpoles and not eat them, though they've been very, very efficient with water isopods and mosquito larvae. Now, I've seen them prey on goldfish eggs, but not on frog eggs. So, when it comes to frogs, it's alright. Now, when I say fishes, of course, I mean like garden or pond fishes, not predators. So, please do not put a black bass or any predatory fish in your pond with frogs, because just like any other predators, they will hunt your frogs down. You will need to imitate the natural habitat of frogs, and by that I mean, like, maybe, yes, take an example of where they come from. That's a swamp or a peat, but most garden frogs will tend to tolerate larger bodies of water, like lakes. And also, do not forget the plants, which they will love in order to feel at home. More on that later too. What I had though at the beginning was a small pond, and you see that I've given them quite an accommodation now. But what this, I think it's 1,000 liters more pond, water system, is now used to look like this. It was a small pond of 250 liters with a small container that is more shallow. Now, you don't need a pump for frogs, though I highly recommend it if you don't like mosquitoes. And the shallow part is, let's say, not mandatory, right? You can perfectly have a normal pond for your frogs. Any pond will go. Any waterlogged, let's say, container can be enough for your frogs. Now, I've even seen them be housed in places like this. Now, this is a flower pot that I've used. It's around 200 liters or 150, and I filled it with water. Put some mosquito fish in them because I didn't want mosquitoes too, and used it for my plants. However, I've seen them, because it mildly looks like their wild habitat, keep this pot as housing, and now they're hanging around my greenhouse. The problem is, though, that would have been perfect if my flower pot would have been buried. However, it is not the case. You will need space under the ground for them to overwinter. Otherwise, the water will be too cold. Now, that is a problem, of course, if you have a winter, right? If you have a dry and monsoon season, there is no need for overwintering, so I guess that's enough. But for my case, I had to take these frogs and put them back in my pond. Oh, also, they've reproduced there. I don't have any photo of the tadpole, unfortunately. Now, let's talk about the biggest problem you will encounter with these frogs. Now, they're resistant to pollution, they're resistant to human activity, they are even resistant to, let's say the plastic containers that you give them. However, like all animals, they have predators. Now, if you live in a remote area, you might have a lot of them. And what I would advise you to do is use the classical meaning of defense against the said animals. Now, if they're protected, by all means, do not attack them. But some people tend to just put a greenhouse on their frog farm, which is completely possible with a pond. That will prevent rodents, birds, snakes from coming in. Most snakes and birds will be afraid of any kind of human presence. So just show them you're there. Just put your pond next to your house, and they will know that there is a human going on there, and that they will not have a good time staying near. However, sometimes the predators are just too good, right? If you have bears around your region, man, I really don't know what to tell you. Just put a wall around your pond or something. Now, for everyone else that lives near the city or in the outskirts, I will advise you to place plants and decor for them to feel at home, but also to shelter. I've had bird attacks, hence the hunting rifle. On my pond, these weren't protected birds, right? These were just your average city birds, like crows and shit. And well, my frogs have never died of predators. They've always just ran off because, yes, I let them freely run around my garden. Now, that's all I have to say though. Thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.